Grace and peace to you this Easter morning. Amen. So it's great to be outside on an Easter morning. I know it's a little chilly, but it's good nonetheless. Being outside puts us in the mood for the early morning walk those women took 2,000 years ago. The precise sounds of a morning in New York are likely different from the sights and sounds of those in Jerusalem. But the feel of a morning is the same no matter where you are in the world. The way the morning light is different than the light of midday. The smell of nature after its nighttime rest. So our gathering here this morning outside puts us in a good place to feel that gospel story. To help us imagine ourselves walking to the tomb with Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. So we share this scene with them, this context. While we walk with them in this way, maybe our mood is different though. We on this morning come to Easter morning on this side of the resurrection. We come to church expecting resurrection. That's why we're here, right? The women who walked to the tomb that morning had no such expectation. They came expecting a dead body. They came expecting a dead body because they had watched Jesus die. In verses just before our Easter gospel, the gospel writer Mark specifically names the women who watched Jesus' crucifixion from a distance. He tells us that the women saw where Jesus was laid, where he was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea, with a large stone rolled in front of it. And now this morning, the women have come in the early hours to give Jesus a proper burial, something he did not receive. Something he did not receive he was hastily buried after his death. In a space of 8 verses, Mark has mentioned the women 3 times, placing them at Jesus' crucifixion, witnessing where Jesus was buried, and now on the morning walk with burial spices. Mark wants his readers to know, he wants us to know, in no one's terms, the women expected death. He even tells us that on the way to the tomb, they were saying to each other, who's going to roll away the stone? They had a conversation about it. You can almost hear them saying, that stone is really big. How are we going to move it? Let's just deal with it when we get there. So while we share the context of the women's early morning walk to the tomb, the sights and smells of morning, we come to this morning with a little bit different expectations. They come expecting death. We come here knowing the other side of the story, resurrection. And yet I think we maybe have more in common with the Marys and Salome than we think. Sure, we know the resurrection story, but on a normal day of the year, a day that's not Easter, say a 3rd Monday in March or a 2nd Monday in October, pick any day, do we live as if we are people of the resurrection? Do we actually live in the knowledge, in the trusting that Jesus died on our behalf and raised from the dead? This is another way of saying, do we actually live trusting and believing in God's grace? For it is God's grace in Jesus' work on the cross and conquering death in the resurrection. I suspect that we have more in common with these women on their walk to the tomb than we think, more than just the morning air. We, like the women, like all of humankind, live in a fallen world, a world where sin works its way in us as individuals. Instead of loving our neighbor as Jesus commanded us, as we talked about on Maundy Thursday, we turn the other way. Sin works its way collectively also in our world. It seems the love of neighbor is harder to work out on a collective scale. And then there is the reality of death in our world, of illness and tragedy and death. As a nation, as a world, this year the pandemic has brought death to the doorsteps of hundreds of thousands of us, to the doorsteps of our own Trinity family. And of course, there is all the difficulties that come with life on this earth: sorrow, fatigue, anxiety, and isolation. Maybe we aren't so different from those women so long ago. The realities and difficulties of life overcome us on every other day of the year. That we get mired in sin. We are like those women who saw Christ crucified. We are all too aware of the death and sin around us. We are like the women who saw him buried. We live in a world of sin and death. So why in the world would we expect, would we understand or comprehend resurrection every day? Why would we do that? The gospel writer Mark understood this reality of humankind. The first people who saw the empty tomb didn't even get it. Mark doesn't sugarcoat it for us. They did not know what in the world had hit them. These women had traveled with Jesus. They had cared for him. Mark tells us that. These are the women who cared for him every day, gave him food to eat as he was traveling. And these women couldn't get it. They didn't get it when they walked into that cave that morning, into the tomb. They were terrified and amazed. And they didn't tell anyone. But of course, we know they did, for we have their story. They expected death, and they were met with life. They were met with God's grace in the resurrection, God's answer to our sin and the forces of sin. God's answer? It's the empty tomb. It's Jesus' body gone, resurrected. It doesn't make sense. The angel had to explain it to them. Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus. He's raised. Come on in and look. He's not here. In the world in which the women lived, as the world is for us, this made no sense, and yet it was. God's grace is like that. It doesn't make sense. That's the whole point of grace. It is a surprise in the truest sense of the word. Martin Luther King gave a great, wonderful sermon on God's grace in the late 1950s. In trying to explain God's grace, we're fail at that, but Dr. King, if anyone could do that. In trying to explain God's grace, King, he spoke actually, grace is just that something that God, Grace is something God gives us. It's a gift we don't merit, that we don't deserve, but which we so desperately need. He goes on to give a great example of grace. He tells this story that he was in seminary in a philosophical theology class with about 30 other students. It was a hard course, and everyone flunked the exam. They all thought they would have to take the class over again. But then the professor came into class and said, and King writes, well, you've been a loyal class, and I think at bottom, maybe I should do something about this. And you will notice on your exam books that I've added 10 points to every examination. Dr. King writes, I got my little blue book, and I noticed up there at the top, it said 75, which was a failing grade. And I looked, and underneath it was written grace with a 10. And then there was a line there, like a little equation, with 85. And that happened for every examination, King writes. There was this additional 10 points so that all of us were able to get by and pass the examination and get through the course. That was grace. He goes on, now my professor didn't need to do that. We didn't deserve it. We didn't merit it, but we so desperately needed it to pass that course and to finish seminary. And this was the grace that carried us through. King says this is the meaning of God's grace. As we stand amid the great examination of life, confronting all the experiences of life, we stand writing our answers to all of these issues, but in all of our very being, we flunk the exam. He says we make mistakes, we're not prepared, we're weak, and yet God reaches out and looks at us in our tragic state and says to us, if you have faith in me, if you'll be loyal, I will add a little to your examination so that you can pass and stand amid life with all the glory. And that's the thing that brings us through life, King ends. That's the thing that brings us through life, God's grace. It's surprising. It's unnerving. The women of today's gospel had front stage seats to God's act of grace in the resurrected Jesus, and they were overwhelmed by terror and amazement. God's grace does that in our everyday lives. God's grace strikes a terror that convicts us, makes us intimately aware of our deep separation from God. But at the same time, it amazes as we are in awe of a God who would go the greatest length for us. So this Easter Sunday, it's a day to think back on this last year or several years. Think back on your life for the resurrection moments. Moments when against all odds, against the odds of sin and death, newness and life won out. Maybe it's a time when you had wronged someone and you finally came to terms with it and brought it to God in a prayer of repentance. And inexplicably, you felt a weight lift off of your shoulders. Maybe it's a time you sat with the loved one who was sick. You sat with them in deep and holy conversation. And the sadness of the sickness is overwhelmed by the feeling of the gift of one another, the gift of a life shared. Or maybe it's a time when you lost someone you loved deeply and you didn't think you'd get through it. But by God's grace, literally, by God's grace, you did. With the help of the Spirit, you got through it. The Spirit moving in people around you, people who cared for you, who brought you food, who sat with you in silence, who wrote out for you a beloved psalm or spoke a psalm with you. Dear friends, this Easter, let's remember these resurrection moments of our lives. These are empty tomb moments that defy expectation or explanation. They defy the reality of sin and death, but they are there. We may ask how, and we can only say by God's grace. As many of you know, I've talked about this before, we have woods in the back of our house. In one part of the woods, there's a stand of pussy willow trees. And every spring, early spring, I like to go to that stand of pussy willow trees and snap some branches to bring home for the house. Last year, when the pandemic was just starting, my daughter and I took a walk out for our annual pilgrimage to the pussy willow tree to find none of the little catkills, their little blossoms out, nothing. You could hardly even see the bush actually because a voracious vine had completely overtaken it. So instead of snipping branches to bring home, we literally got into the bush and started snipping the vine down. And it took about, over an hour to get this vine off this bush. So it had snuffed out one part of the stand of pussy willows, and we really weren't sure how in the world this was going to work out. A few weeks later, I was walking the dog and came to the stand of pussy willows, And I was looking across the field at the bush, and I thought I could see some new sprigs of green on it, but underneath there was a strange haze of purple. And I couldn't tell if the light was playing tricks with my vision or what. As I came closer, I realized that underneath the pussy willow tree, there was a beautiful stand of purple flowers. They had never been there before. I had never seen them in the woods before. And there they were, under this pussy willow tree that we had taken the vine off. So I had maybe expected some of those little catkills, little branches, pussy willow blossoms to be on that tree. I didn't expect that purple flower surprise that day. Easter is a day for that kind of purple flower surprise. It's a day when we try to comprehend the empty tomb along with those women. And then we realize that the grace of the risen Savior, it's just with us constantly. And yet at the same time, it's a constant surprise. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. Amen.